Hi, I'm Joseph. Welcome to Notes on Style. Today's style notes are going to be about drape, and specifically drape in regard to wide-fitting pants. Wide-fitting pants are certainly all the rage, and the defining factor of a generational shift on how men's clothes fit the body. As recently as last week, we saw the viral news story regarding the 4 lads in jeans. Honestly, a viral news story I had never heard of prior to last week, in which 4 British dudes, or lads, were formerly dragged for their skin-tight, skinny jeggings pants, which look like the most exaggerated, extreme example of mid-20-teens ASOS fashion. But the 4 lads took their trolling criticism to heart and returned with a new viral news story in which the guys go out and buy a new set of pants in line with the trends of 2024. That being, at the very least, straight-fitting, but in the most slightly exaggerated way, what appears to be more of a wide or loose-fit pair of jeans. Stories and mini stories like this often have an interesting way of planting themselves in the news cycle, so that they seem to just float in and out of numerous publications simultaneously with ease. Not being a member of the media myself, only working on assumption, I would guess that stories like this have a natural way of progressing through the feeds of bored reporters looking for some sort of blip in the style radar. But other times, I wonder myself if stories like this are in some way placed in the ether so that the effects of reporting can help grease the gears of the big economy wheel. Because yes, trends come and go, and yes, trends define each decade, but what often determines those trends is very dependent on a perception of youth defining what is cool for each generation. And having worked in the fashion industry myself, granted not necessarily in the trendiest of circles, but certainly working fully aware that the foundation of all fashion is certainly to convince shoppers that what they own is never quite enough and must always be revisited to make sure that they are still cool. So here we stand on the verge of yet another shift, keeping an eye on what the trendy 17-year-olds are wearing. And now the most obvious answer is that they are rejecting the decade of millennial skinny pants. Slim and skinny pants certainly were in and of themselves a rejection of the tired old office worker khakis of the 1990s into something that strived to be more flattering and more streamlined for a wide variety of guys. But like any trend, the style gets copied and copied and copied to where what often is seen as most fashionable by some tends to be the most exaggerated version of the initial idea. And because we all have different body types and body shapes, the reality of a designer's vision of a silhouette or a proportion on the runway on a model can be vastly different when worn by the average Joe. Maybe this is why when the world is desperate for newness and the fashion world is eyeing what some skinny high school student is wearing with the type of physique that any piece of clothing seems to have an edge, the desire for a new fit of clothing takes hold. And here we are in 2024 when kids are rifling through the racks of their local thrift store, grabbing some 1990s clothes that have made their way from millennials and boomers' closets into the donation bins. These old clothes seem fresh again because comparatively they seem to have more volume, a more rotund and full line. This fullness of line does many things. It acts as a rejection of the body. The form of the clothing takes on a self-importance beyond the lines of the human body so that the focus is on the silhouette of the clothing itself, not the body beneath. The clothes instantly create more drama because of the wide variety of proportions and shapes that can be created through these volumes. Whereas 10 years ago, we were being told to slim down every piece of clothing we buy so that the body becomes more visible and therefore projects a stronger sense of self through a more defined physique. Now this next generation rejects this vanity and objectification of the body, but instead choosing neutrality through a commodification and a standardization of simpler, cleaner forms, fluidly intermixing heavy workwear or military-ish references with boxy basics that can be achieved through gathering up old flannels and t-shirts and trimming off 3 or 4 inches from the hem. And this is great. Kids should always be experimenting with newness, and the rest of the world can learn from these experiments. And it's great that they can DIY and upcycle something that was once familiar into something new. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that just because something is new that we all must adopt it without question. This is where fashion trends start to become something a little more worrying. Because from business and retailers' perspective, something new in the air is quickly perceived as blood in the water, and retailers desperate for newness quickly begin to market to consumers that the clothes they already own can no longer be worn, because in order for people to maintain their relevancy, the only way forward is to go out and buy new clothes. Sometimes when stories like this crop up, sure, they may be funny, innocent clickbait on the surface, but sometimes I can't help but wonder, and maybe this is a bit paranoid, but are stories like this a plant so that over time we look at ourselves in the mirror, we say, maybe my pants are too tight? Because that fear of doubt compels us to go out and buy things. The fashion industry counts on this, but we shouldn't just blame the fashion industry. This compulsion to spend is representative of the driving force of the economy as a whole. And as we pull back and look at it from a macroeconomic standpoint, this consumer spending cycle is crucial to keeping the gears in motion, the stores filled with new things, and factories fulfilling orders. Here we see a report by financial analyst McKinsey & Company regarding the state of the fashion industry projected for 2024 as we look at both the luxury and non-luxury sectors, specifically the United States. We see a pretty dramatic curve after 2020 and the depths of the COVID lockdowns. With people's pockets flush with cash from several injections of stimulus money, consumer spending in 2021 rose sharply. But once inflation crept up, not far behind, fashion and apparel quickly leveled off and dropped drastically by 2023. Of course, this is just a drop in the bucket in the drastic changes in consumer spending habits in general, post-COVID, not to mention the Fed's desperation at trying to curb excess cash flow with its qualitative easing. Fashion industry just reliably chugs along, ensuring that customers maintain a constant need to go out and buy something new at all times. Sometimes I'm vaguely reminded of the hemline theory or the lipstick theory. The hemline theory, first realized in the 1930s, claimed that in times of economic downturn, women's skirts and dresses became a lot longer to hide the poor condition of their stockings, showing runs and tears due to tight consumer spending. And at times in excess, lengths of skirts and dresses became shorter because women could afford new hosiery. Or perhaps more accurately, the lipstick theory came about in the 1970s. As fashion companies began to market their brand names into a wider variety of products, namely lipstick and cosmetics, or more recently, fragrances, this theory goes that when women can no longer afford to go out and buy new clothes, they may be able to pinch together enough money to go out and buy a tube of lipstick that bears the same designer's name. These kind of economic theories may not literally be true, but I cannot help but be interested in their intentions of tying together abstract consumer spending habits with literal fluctuations in the economy. I remember hearing at one point something along the lines of, when the economy takes a downturn with regard to menswear, guys are more likely to go out and buy a new suit because they need to go out for job interviews and could not wear their old business clothes again. Somewhat antiquated theory, especially now that these days guys are no longer wearing business suits to job interviews. But maybe these kind of theories might also explain why now post-COVID, when people want to go out and buy something a little bit fresher and are looking for some sort of newness in their clothing, the appeal of a new silhouette or a new fit in their clothes, like the new wide-fitting pants or cropped tops, can seem very appealing for retailers. This eagerness for newness can certainly be a major wake-up and try to crank up those retail sales to add a boost to the economy as a whole. Going back to the four lads in pants also being British, obviously I can't help but wonder if this desire for a big economic push might really be more pervasive in the post-Brexit economy. So convincing guys to go out and buy new pairs of pants could really prove quite lucrative to the struggling British economy. But maybe all this is a bit cynical, and sometimes when you dig too deep into the trends or what the driving factors are, you might get distracted, paranoid, or overly consumed in abstract economic theory rather than just appreciating, hey, there's some cool big pants and I want a pair. When you're looking to buy a pair of wide leg pants, there are a few factors that must be considered with the wider leg. Pants can do a few different things depending on the material. Just because the legs of a pant are physically wider does not mean that they will automatically make you look like the dude in the picture if you're not conscientious of some of these factors. The main point being, the heavier and denser the fabric, the more the wide leg pant will hold its own silhouette, giving you that structured and puddle look down at the hem, and a more tubular shape around the leg. This structured look can usually be a bit more flattering on a wide variety of body shapes. This is why the most common example that we see of wide leg pants usually comes in the form of loose, baggy, or wide-fitting jeans, Because jeans have that weight, they can hold their own to give that shape. So they instantly have more of an impact on the change in the silhouette. And not to mention, jeans are also one of the easiest pieces to wear and much easier for a guy to go out and buy one pair of wide leg pants with a much more versatility as opposed to buying a handful of different colored pants, which may require more coordination with the other pieces in their closet. But an alternative to blue jeans, and maybe the second level up in the wide leg pant phenomenon, something we see a lot of guys wearing and obviously has proven very successful in terms of their sales, is easily represented by the J. Crew Giant Fit Chino. This was a stroke of genius on J. Crew's part, because the chino is not too far different in terms of fabric weight to denim, and similarly being a very structured fabric with a high degree of rigidity in the twill that also defines a silhouette quite nicely for a wide variety of body shapes. A chino undeniably masculine, utilitarian, vaguely reminiscent of a military style, and incredibly versatile. I myself have not been able to get a hold of a pair of Giant Fit chinos. My size always seems to be sold out, but maybe one of these days I'll give them a try. But thanks to my time designing trousers for Ralph Lauren, I can also realize that a chino is a chino is a chino. So when I go out and buy a pair of Giant Fit chinos, sorry Ralph, I hit eBay. Because I actually think that before we started tinkering with the chinos, they had a sweet spot back in the late 80s of a heavy-duty twill fabric with a generous double pleat and a wider leg. Pleats might not be everyone's cup of tea, but personally I feel they can add a bit of visual interest when you have this much fabric going on. Because I have a bit of a dad bod, the difference in my waistline to my hip to a wide leg is a bit squared off or rounded off. So sometimes a detail can help add a little visual interest to a silhouette. I find that when styling a wider leg chino in a stiffer fabric, oftentimes it can be a study of contrasts. You can easily pair the stiff fabric with a softer cotton sweater or something that has a more rounded feel because of the knit fabric. This contrast can add a degree of visual interest, or you can, with similar types of fabric, combine various clean-lined fabrics together for a more cohesive approach. In another example, I have a layered cotton chunky knit sweater over a t-shirt, but under a stiff suede trucker jacket. So here we have visual interest in the variations of fabrics, with the outer shell maintaining cleaner, sharper lines layered over the softer lines of the knit t-shirt and the sweater being knit. Or as summer goes on and the weather gets warmer, a simple t-shirt and chinos really does the trick again, with the softer lines of the more form-fitting t-shirt contrasting with the sharper lines of the looser-fitting chino. Play and contrast can go a long way. And in these examples, a more crop jacket silhouette helps to maintain the popular 1/3, 2/3 proportion theory, which can keep a flattering overall appearance by lengthening the legs visually. And finally, the final stage, once you move beyond jeans and chinos, to my mind, is the most advanced wide leg move. Something that does require a bit more attention because of its elegance, and that is a drapier wide leg pant. And this brings us to the topic of today's video, which is drape. Now, in its simplest form, drape refers to the method in which clothes used to be tailored to an individual customer's body by constructing the garment in mid-air against the body's shape. Draping is a science all unto itself, working not only with the characteristics of the fabric itself, but also in achieving forms like a sculptor, dancing with the lines of the body and the fabric, using gravity as the ultimate defining trait as what the fabric can achieve when sewn together into a garment. Now, over the course of the 20th century, silhouettes came in and out of fashion for a large part because of the amount of fabric required to achieve a more draped silhouette, adding to the ultimate cost of the garment itself. Draped looks were often synonymous, even at a subconscious level, with the type of luxury, because surely anyone that could afford that much fabric must have a high degree of personal wealth, let alone be able to pay someone to craft a garment out of this abundance of fine fabric. And probably the pinnacle of the draped aesthetic came in the form of the Italian master Giorgio Armani in the 70s and 80s. Armani silhouettes dripped luxury because the man knew not only how to drape anything you could imagine, but also knew how to engineer fabrics to achieve this wide range of garments with this draped quality. But of course, his real genius was in transitioning draped clothing from women's clothes to formerly stiff and staid men's suit. So for the first time, men could understand and appreciate the beauty and the luxury of a fluid silhouette in a masculine form. But this draped look is very challenging, unless you have an entire wardrobe full of silks and fine wools and gabardines which all flow together into an entire ensemble. That's the other side of Armani's genius, is that it's not so easy to buy one piece of draped clothing without needing to go out and buy all the pieces of draped clothing. So this is why a draped wide leg pant can often be a bit more of a challenge when pairing the draped pant with other items. Whereas a stiffer fabric like jeans or chino, you can achieve looks through both similarities and contrasts, and it can be much easier. In other words, you could pair a stiff chino with a stiff denim jacket, or a stiff chino with a tailored blazer, or contrast it by doing a stiff chino with a soft sweater. And you can jump back and forth between soft and hard lines to achieve different types of looks. Whereas with a drape or a silkier pant, all you can really do is play in the world of contrasts. The drape can look good when it's paired against something like a stiff denim jacket or a soft knit sweater. But again, unless you go out and buy shirts and jackets and knitwear that are all draped and flowy, you will not have the same advantage that you do with structured jeans or chinos, being able to jump back and forth between similar and contrasting silhouettes. Not to mention, draped clothes tend to look most flattering on a very fit physique. Making a flowing fabric look more flattering can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. Whereas at least a structured chino or jean helps to shape up the lines of the body into something more defined. So there's certainly not a right and a wrong answer, but unlike skin-tight jeggings where there's so much stretch in them that the clothes become the body, with wide leg silhouettes we need to be a bit more conscious of material choices as well as the fit in order to achieve the looks that we want. And of course, this does not mean cheap or expensive clothing is going to differentiate a good fit or a bad fit in terms of wider silhouettes. It just means that as consumers, we need to be aware of the factors that contribute to a more successful purchase and how to integrate this new style into our existing wardrobe without being conned into having to go out and buy an entirely new set of clothes. Ultimately, I do always try to stress not to get too consumed in the rhetoric of your clothes being out of date. Of course, we all want to keep an eye on what is trending and what is new to keep ourselves looking fresh, but don't always feel compelled to go out and buy whatever the kids are wearing in order to make yourself feel relevant. The best way forward is often taking into consideration new things, trying things out in a new way. Enjoy the process, but do not feel bad if what you wore 10 years ago you look back at now and laugh at how foolish you looked. Ultimately, remember that in experimentation, the process of incorporating a trend, even in the simplest of ways, can be enough, and that the most stylish way of doing it is to maintain your own sense of self through that experimentation. Because nothing against the four lads in pants or whatever, but if every 10 years you look at a picture of yourself and realize your clothing is out of date and you need to go buy new ones, a truly stylish guy might just be able to buy one or two items every once in a while and make considered purchases of clothing that works for him always. Remember the old adage, make sure you're wearing the clothes and the clothes aren't wearing you. Okay, so that's it for this week, guys. If you're enjoying the video, please do give me a thumbs up. If you're joining the channel, please do give me a follow. If you've got any other ideas or any suggestions for something you'd like to see on this channel, please do leave a comment below. Check out some of my other videos on the channel as well for many other topics. Once again, I'm Joseph, and the channel is Some Notes on Style. Thanks again for watching, guys. See you next time.